In 1955, an entire American town burned to the ground, but witnesses swore the fire came from a radio broadcast. For years, the signal kept returning, calling names, playing hymns through the static, and some say it never stopped.
In the winter of 1947, Ashford Hollow was barely more than a scattering of houses tucked between the Tennessee hills. The town had one schoolhouse, a church with peeling white paint, and a single attraction that made it feel modern: the WQBR 88 radio station. The station was small, just a brick rectangle at the edge of town, but it gave Ashford Hollow a voice. Farmers tuned in before dawn to hear the weather report. Mothers played the evening programs while cooking. Teenagers sat up late, pressing their ears against tinny speakers as jittery jazz records spun across the airwaves. But everything changed on the night of March 3, 1947. According to the official report filed by Sheriff Donnelly, a fire broke out inside the station at approximately 11:42 p.m. A handful of locals saw the smoke rising and tried to force their way in, but the doors wouldn't budge. Flames curled from the windows, feeding on the dry wood of the interior walls. Inside were three people: Thomas "Tommy" Granger, the station's 27-year-old technician, known for falling asleep in the booth; Anna Caldwell, a secretary who often stayed late typing schedules; Elliot Ross, the night DJ, whose voice had become familiar across 3 counties. None of them came out. By the time the fire brigade arrived from the nearest city almost 40 minutes later, the building was half collapsed. They recovered the bodies the next morning. The local paper, the Ashford Gazette, described them as burned beyond recognition, locked together near the stairwell. The official explanation was faulty wiring. The investigation closed within a week. But some witnesses told a different story. Whispers after the fire: a milkman named James Riley was the first to claim he heard something strange. According to his statement, at around 11:30, just minutes before the flames, he tuned his truck's radio to WQBR 88. What he heard wasn't music or commercials. It was screaming. He swore he heard in a Caldwell's voice begging, "Please, somebody open the door." The program cut out suddenly, then static. Another resident, Mrs. Lillian Harper, told neighbors that she smelled smoke in her living room as the broadcast faded. It was as if the fire came through the radio itself, she later told the sheriff. Her account never made it into the official record. The aftermath: the radio station was never rebuilt. The charred remains stood at the edge of Ashford Hollow, blackened bricks swallowed slowly by weeds. People stopped driving that way after dark. Children dared each other to throw rocks at the collapsed doorway, but few lingered long. Still, the frequency remained active. Even without a functioning station, old radios would sometimes catch faint static at exactly 88.0 FM. Local farmers joked it was just bleed over from neighboring channels, but others insisted there were voices inside the noise: half sentences, cries, murmurs that vanished as soon as you tried to listen too closely.
By 1950, stories had spread across the county. Some claimed the victims had never left, that their last screams had been trapped in the airwaves like FLIs in amber. The town grew quiet about it. Ashford Hollow was small, and gossip could sour a place faster than bad milk. The ruins of WQBR 88 sat untouched, avoided, yet never torn down. It would take almost a decade before the legend returned, this time louder, clearer, and impossible to ignore. By the summer of 1955, Ashford Hollow had almost forgotten about the fire. The town had moved on in the quiet way that rural places do. Kids grew up, men left for work in the cities, women gathered in church halls with their covered dishes and quiet gossip. The burned-out shell of the radio station had become part of the scenery, its collapsed roof hidden beneath kudzu vines and creeping ivy. And yet, the frequency still hummed. At first, it was just static, faint and crackling. But in early June, a farmer named Harold Bishop claimed he heard a woman's voice on 88.0 FM while tuning his battered Philco radio. He swore it wasn't music or an advertisement, it was a plea, soft but unmistakable. "We never left." His wife scolded him for drinking corn whiskey before supper, but within weeks, others reported the same thing. A shopkeeper heard her name whispered through the static. A group of teenagers claimed they listened to laughter, ragged, unnatural laughter that cut off when one of them shouted at the radio. Most of the town ignored it. Radios picked up interference all the time. Frequencies bled together. No one wanted to believe that something was still broadcasting from a building that had been nothing but scorched brick for nearly a decade. But then came Robert Kinley. The schoolteacher Kinnickley was 32, a high school teacher who had returned to Ashford Hollow after earning his degree in Nashville. Quiet, bookish, and respected, he wasn't the kind of man people dismissed easily. In July 1955, he began documenting the strange transmissions. He brought a reel-to-reel tape recorder into his classroom and stayed late after lessons, waiting until the clock ticked past 2 a.m., the hour when the voices were strongest. The first tape contained nothing but static. The second captured faint tones, like a piano being played from underwater. On the third, however, he recorded something different, a woman's voice, thin and trembling. The words were hard to decipher, but on repeated listening, he made them out. Anna, get out, Anna Caldwell, the secretary who had died in the fire. Kinley grew obsessed. He played the tapes for colleagues, who urged him to stop. It's the power lines, they said. It's interference from Chattanooga stations. But Kinley insisted it wasn't. He had listened carefully. The voices knew names. They whispered in patterns that no static ever could.
The rumors spread by August. More people were talking. The postmaster wrote in his diary that he tuned in one night and smelled something burning in his office. The pharmacist's assistant swore she heard a child crying through her radio, though no children had ever been reported in the station fire. Word spread to the local paper, the Ashford Gazette. On August 22nd, it ran a small column titled, "Old Station's Frequency Haunts Town Again." The article was lighthearted, almost mocking, but tucked at the end was a mention of Kinley's tapes. A teacher at the Hollow School claims to have captured unusual transmissions, it read. He warns townsfolk not to dismiss them so quickly. That was the beginning of the panic. Robert's notes. Kinley began keeping meticulous notes, pages filled with times, dates, and descriptions of what he heard. His handwriting grew messier as the weeks passed. On one page, he scrawled, 2:14 a.m. a man's voice said my name. 2:17 smell of smoke in the classroom. 2:21 someone knocking, not at the door, on the radio itself. By September, his students noticed a change. Their teacher looked gaunt, distracted. He wore the same suit days in a row, his eyes rimmed red as if he hadn't slept. When asked, he smiled faintly and told them he was doing important work. But the recordings grew darker. The September tape on September 9th, Kinley captured the clearest transmission yet. His neighbor, who later heard it, swore the voice belonged to Elliot Ross, the DJ who had perished in the blaze. The tape begins with static, then a faint male voice pushes through. "Robert, can you hear us?" The voice cracks, followed by the sound of something wood splitting, fire roaring. Then louder. They lock the door. We're still inside. The tape ends with a shrill, metallic scream that distorted the recorder's reels. Kinley played it for the sheriff, who dismissed it as a prank. He played it for the preacher, who told him to destroy the tapes and pray. But Robert Kinley did neither. Instead, he kept listening, and that is when the disappearances began. By the spring of 1955, Ashford Hollow had learned to live with its scars. The ruins of WQBR 88 were now overgrown, a jagged skeleton of blackened brick that crows perched on at dawn. Most folks passed it without a second glance, except for children daring each other to throw pebbles into its collapsed doorway. The town was changing. A new grocery had opened on Main Street, neon lights buzzing proudly against the dark. A few residents even bought shiny new television sets, though reception was terrible in the hills. The radio, however, remained king, and so it came as a shock when the voices returned. The first night, it was a Friday in April, when Edgar White, a mechanic, swore he heard something unusual while tuning his radio before bed. At first, it was just static, but then so faint he thought it was a trick came a man's voice. "This is Elliot Ross, coming to you live from Cuba, please. If anyone can hear me, we're still inside." Edgar nearly dropped his whiskey glass. Elliot Ross had been dead for 8 years. The voice cut to screams, then silence. He told his wife, who told the pastor, who told the sheriff. By the next Sunday, half the town was whispering about the broadcast from the grave. The pattern didn't happen every night. Sometimes weeks passed in silence. But when the frequency clicked alive, the pattern was always the same. First came the familiar station jingle, warped and slowed. Then a voice, sometimes male, sometimes female, pleading for help, as if trapped in a burning building, always ending in a high-pitched shriek, like a microphone feeding back. Some nights, listeners claimed the voices addressed them directly. Tommy Granger, I can't feel my hands. The door won't open. Help us. Others swore they heard their own names whispered in the static. The skeptics, not everyone believed. Sheriff Donnelly dismissed it as kids with a ham radio and bad taste. The local paper refused to print anything. Ashford Hollow doesn't need ghost stories, the editor said. But more and more people claimed to hear it. Farmers in the fields, truckers passing through late at night. A traveling salesman from Kentucky reported pulling over when his car radio suddenly screamed at full volume, "Get out of the building." He swore smoke filled his car for a moment, though no one else saw a thing. The experiment that summer, a group of high school boys decided to record the frequency. They dragged an old reel-to-reel machine into a barn and left it running overnight, tuned to 88.0. In the morning, the tape was full. At first, only static. Then the faint crackle of music, an old jazz record that had once been Elliot Ross's signature sign-off. A man's voice followed. "If you are hearing this, the fire never ended. We are still here, burning."
The voice dissolved into shrieks so sharp the tape melted in places. When the boys played the surviving sections for their parents, the adults paled. Many recognized the voices. It wasn't just Elliot Ross, it was Anna Caldwell and Tommy Granger as well. After that night, people stopped calling it a prank. The fear be autumn. The broadcasts were common knowledge. Radios clicked alive with phantom programs, and those who listened to long reported headaches, nausea, and even burns on their skin like faint scorch marks across the hands and arms. Some claimed they smelled smoke in their homes whenever the jingle played. Others whispered that the voices weren't trapped at all. They were reaching out trying to drag new listeners into the same endless broadcast. The sheriff tried to ban people from tuning in. He even ordered radios in public places to be fixed at different frequencies. But in private, almost everyone still checked 88.0 at night. Curiosity was stronger than fear. And then, in October, came the night when the broadcast answered back. By October 21, 1955, the whispers had grown into fear. Ashford Hollow was on edge. Families barred windows, and many refused to keep radios in their homes. But curiosity is a cruel master, and more than a few kept listening when the hour grew late. That Friday, something changed. The broadcast that spoke back at 11:47 p.m. The static broke without warning. Radios across town hissed, pop, and then clear as day came the warped jingle of WQBR. Then, a voice. Not the panic cries of before, not the endless pleas for help. This voice was calm, steady, cold. "We know you are listening." Dozens of listeners swore they froze where they stood. Some claimed their radios dialed themselves to 88.0, no matter what station they'd been set to. You've heard us burn. You've heard us scream. But tonight, you will join the program. The town reacts phones rang all over Ashford Hollow. Neighbors shouted across porches. A few families piled into cars and drove through the night, refusing to return until sunrise. In the sheriff's office, Donnelly slammed his fist on the desk. "This is someone's sick joke," he growled. But when his deputy tried to shut off the police radio, the dial refused to move. It hummed with static until the voice returned. "Greater than Sheriff Donnelly, you stood outside the station that night. You watched us burn." The sheriff went pale. Few knew that he had indeed been first on the scene in 1947, powerless to break through the flames. "You turned away. You left us." The office filled with the smell of charred wood. The Jones family on Maple Street. The Jones family gathered around their living room radio. Their youngest daughter, Clara, only 9, stared wide-eyed as a woman's voice came through the speaker. "Clara, it's so cold here. Come play with us." The girl screamed and bolted from the room, insisting that the voice belonged to Anna Caldwell, the announcer who died in the fire. She had never heard Anna alive, but she described her tone perfectly. When Mr. Jones tried to smash the radio with a hammer, sparks erupted. The hammer head melted against the casing. The fire that wasn't around midnight. Flames were reported at the ruins of WQBR. Dozens rushed to the site, buckets and hoses in hand only to find nothing burning at all. Yet the ground was hot. Too hot to stand on for long, the voice carried from the air itself, louder than any radio, greater than we are the broadcast. We never stop transmitting, and now, neither will you. The crowd scattered, but many reported hearing whispers in their ears long after, like phantom signals embedded in their own thoughts. The aftermath be dawn, the town was shaken. Radios everywhere had fallen silent, back to ordinary programming. But the damage was done. Some families left Ashford Hollow entirely, abandoning homes overnight. Others swore off radio forever, but just a few admitted something they should never have confessed. They said they felt drawn to the voices, that when the broadcast had spoken, it hadn't just scared them, it had welcomed them. And late at night, they found themselves tuning back to 88.0, waiting, hoping, longing for the voices to return, because deep down, they didn't believe it was a curse. They believed it was an invitation. Ashford Hollow had changed. In the weeks after the night of the answer, people stopped meeting in the streets. The church bell rang on Sundays, but fewer came. The grocery on Main Street closed early. Even the children whispered less, because everyone was listening. The pull of 88.0, it began small. Radios would flicker back to 88.0 even when unplugged. Families swore they packed their sets away in attics, only to find them humming on kitchen counters in the morning. Sheriff Donnelly smashed 3 radios in one night, only to wake and find them whole again, lined neatly on his porch, all dials frozen at 88.0. Some said you didn't even need a radio anymore. If you sat still enough, you could hear the faint hiss of static rising from the walls, the trees, even the inside of your own skull. The voices choose be late October. The broadcast had become more selective, no longer a blanket of screams. Now they whispered names. Mr. Hawkins, the butcher, heard his wife's voice on the air. She had died 10 years earlier of fever. Come back. Richard, she cooed, come where the fire doesn't burn. Hawkins was found the next morning in his shop, standing still in front of his radio. His eyes cooked black like coal. A teenage boy named Henry claimed he heard his future. The radio told him he would die in a car crash before winter's first snow. He laughed it off, until his parents' truck overturned on an icy road the very next week. The boy's body was found 30 feet from the wreck, his ears blistered as though pressed against red-hot metal. The town understood. The voices weren't asking anymore. They were choosing. The sheriff's Sheriff Donnelly, once the loudest skeptic, grew gaunt. He stopped shaving, stopped sleeping. Deputies reported that he sat in his office at all hours, the police radio crackling endlessly. One night, Deputy Langley swore he heard Donnelly speaking back to the static, nodding, as though taking orders. When Langley confronted him, Donnelly raised a pistol and said quietly, greater than they were right. I should have gone into the fire that night. I'm the reason they're trapped. Now I have to let them out. The next morning, the sheriff's cruiser was found abandoned outside the burned station. His badge sat neatly on the driver's seat. Donnelly himself was never seen again, but his voice was. A week later, during a broadcast, townsfolk heard the unmistakable drawl of their sheriff. Greater than. This is Sheriff Thomas Donnelly, signing off and signing in. And then came the screams. The uninvited listener, perhaps the most terrifying account, came from a farmer outside Ashford Hollow. He never owned a radio, prided himself on it, but on November 2nd, as he sat alone on his porch, he claimed the air around him turned thick, buzzing, like bees inside his skull. Then he heard the broadcast without a speaker, directly in his mind. You think you can hide without a radio? You're the radio. Neighbors found him the next day, alive but deaf. His eardrums had burst. On his wall, scratched with his own fingernails, were the numbers, 88.0. By December, Ashford Hollow was a ghost of itself. But on the coldest night of the year, the signal grew louder than ever before. The warning it was Reverend Cole who first felt it. He'd refused to keep a radio. Yet on Christmas Eve he collapsed during Mass, clutching his head. His last words before he blacked out. Greater than they want all of us tonight. They want the air open. No one understood what open meant. Not until the sun went down. The broadcast without radio sat 11:58 p.m. The air shifted. Witnesses described it as though the sky itself bent inward, pressing down on the town. A hum like 1,000 wires straining filled every street, every attic, every barn. And then without a single radio switched on, the broadcast began. From the still night air itself came static, a suffocating roar. Windows rattled. Animals screamed. People fell to their knees with hands over their ears. But within that noise were voices. Not just one, but hundreds. Men, women, children, some alive, some long dead. The entire town of Ashford Hollow was listening, whether they wanted to or not.
January 1956. Snow lay heavy on the back roads of Vermont when State Trooper Michael Hanley drove into Ashford Hollow for a welfare check. The town had stopped answering calls, stopped receiving mail, and the last delivery driver reported empty streets. Hanley expected flu, maybe a snowed-in community. Instead, he found a town without people. Cars sat abandoned with keys and ignitions. Laundry froze stiff on clotheslines. Dinner plates gathered, ice on tables. But not a single human walked the streets. The only sound, radios, everywhere. From shop windows, kitchens, gas stations, crackling static filled the town like breath. The call for help finally made it 5 blocks before turning back, skin crawling. In his report, filed the same night, he wrote, "The silence is unnatural. The air feels charged, like a storm waiting to break. Recommend full investigation. This place is not safe." Within a week, a state team of 6 arrived, 2 troopers, a county coroner, and 3 researchers from Burlington College curious about the mass disappearance. Among them was Professor Arthur Bellamy, a historian of folklore who insisted on bringing reel-to-reel recorders. "If something is transmitting," he said, "we must capture it." First science team set up headquarters in the schoolhouse. Electricity was still running, generators humming somewhere underground. By the second night, every one of them complained of ringing ears. The coroner, Dr. Agnes Flint, said it felt like standing under a live wire. At midnight, the recorders clicked on by themselves. No one touched them, and from the empty reels came faint whispers, "Welcome back. You're late. We've been waiting." The investigation team split into pairs. Hanley and Bellamy checked the general store. Trooper McCarthy and Dr. Flint searched the church. The 2 grad assistants, Ellis and Raymond, went to the ruins of Will. By dawn, only 2 pairs returned. Ellis and Raymond never came back. The church McCarthy and Flint found hymnals scattered across the pews, every page torn to Psalm 88. "Thou hast laid me in the lowest pit, in darkness, in the deeps." The organ began to play on its own, not hymns. Static, drawn into long, low notes, like the pipes were choking on air. McCarthy fired his revolver into the pipes. The sound didn't stop. They fled. The store Hanley and Bellamy discovered the Miller twins' scribbled notes, half-burnt pages shoved behind a shelf. One read, "They call from the fire under the ground. If you hear them, cover your ears. If you see them, do not follow." Bellamy pocketed the notes. "Proof," he whispered, almost reverently. That was when the store radio switched on, though Hanley swore it had no power. "Bellamy, we hear you. We hear the hunger in your voice. Join us." The professor dropped to his knees, eyes glassy, muttering, "I must record. I must." Hanley dragged him back to the schoolhouse, cursing all the way.
The ruins sat 3:12 a.m. The recorders in the schoolhouse clicked again. Voices screamed through the static. "Greater than Ellis. Raymond, with us now. More to come. More. Hanley, panicked, grabbed his rifle. Flint begged him not to leave, but outside the window, near the black silhouette of the burned radio tower, 2 figures stood in the snow. They were Ellis and Raymond. Their skin glowed faint, like paper held to a lamp. Their mouths moved, but no sound came from them, only the static rising from every radio in town. Collapsed to be the 5th night. Professor Bellamy vanished. His bed was untouched, but his recorder was gone. The last tape he left behind was short. On it, he whispers, "Greater than. I think the signal is alive. I think it wants out. If the air is his prison, then every ear is a doorway. Don't listen, for God's sake. Don't." The recording cuts to shrieking static. Official reports state closed the investigation within a month. The files, redacted and sealed, listed environmental contamination as the cause of Ashford Hollow's abandonment. But Hanley knew the truth. Every night he lay awake in his farmhouse outside Montpelier, and every night, no matter if his radio was smashed, unplugged, buried in the shed, he heard voices whispering from the corner of his room. "Greater than you left us there, but the air follows you. Everywhere." February 1956. The story of Ashford Hollow never made the newspapers. Officials called it quarantine. Whispers said polio, but no one believed it. Still, the town was sealed off. The roads were blocked. The map quietly erased its name. Yet something leaked. Not people, not animals. A frequency. Truck drivers along Route 9 reported strange interference, songs cut mid-melody, replaced by low static and broken syllables. "Turn back," one heard in the dark cab of his rig. He did, abandoning his cargo by the roadside. Weeks later, the truck was found empty, the cab door wide open, driver never located. In a diner 50 miles north, the jukebox refused to play. Each record, no matter the label, spun the same sound, whispers layered over static, repeating a woman's voice. Find the tower. Find the fire. Patrons fled. The diner closed by morning. The signal had grown teeth. The Bellamy tapes when Professor Arthur Bellamy disappeared. His reel-to-reel machine went missing with him. 3 weeks later, the machine surfaced in a pawn shop estates away. The shop owner claimed a man with bandaged hands sold it cheap, saying it won't shut up. The buyer, a college student named Martin Case, recorded himself playing it in his dorm. The tape starts with laughter his own, nervous and mocking. Then comes the voice. Martin, you've already heard us. We're inside the blood hum of your ears. There's no tape. There's only air. The recording ends in screaming, followed by a long dragging sound. Case's roommate returned to find the dorm door locked from inside.
By the time it was forced open, Martin was gone. The recorder spun on, empty reel, turning, whispering fragments of his name. Signal on the road. State Trooper Hanley tried to escape it all. He left Vermont, rented a cabin in Maine, and smashed every radio in sight. But his headaches grew worse. One night, he woke to the sound of children laughing under his window. No children lived within miles. When he looked outside, he saw faint lights moving through the woods, bobbing like lanterns. Then he realized they weren't lanterns. They were faces, glowing pale like the ones he'd seen in Ashford Hollow. The laughter was layered, static. By dawn, his cabin walls were covered in frost except for one phrase, finger-drawn in dripping lines. The air is open. The broadening circle be March. Radio operators across New England noticed the anomaly. A burst of static would sweep through their frequencies at night, always repeating the same numbers. 1955. 1955. At first they logged it as interference. Then some began reporting side effects, hallucinations, headaches, voices in the wires. One ham operator in Connecticut wrote in his log, "They keep asking me to come closer to the speaker. I think I will tonight." That was his last entry. April 1956. The static was no longer local. Entire cities reported blackouts that lasted seconds but felt longer. People swore. Their clocks jumped. Hands frozen in place. When the lights returned, some streets were empty, not destroyed, just emptied. The Boston Blackout, 11:23 p.m. one Saturday. Boston's North End went dark. Thousands of radios crackled at once, spilling the same garbled voice. "We are still burning. We are still waiting. Join us." When power returned minutes later, nearly 200 residents were missing. Doors locked from inside. Food still warm on stoves. Families vanished mid-meal. Entire blocks gone without a trace. Only their radios remained, all tuned to dead stations. Speakers faintly warm, as if freshly used. The national alert panic pushed the government to act. President Eisenhower authorized a nationwide emergency broadcast test, attempting to override the rogue frequency. Engineers swore they had isolated the signal, but when the alert went live, every radio in America carried something else. A low hum filled the air, followed by overlapping voices, men, women, children chanting in unison. 1955, 1955, 1955. In living rooms, families clutched each other as their radios glowed red, brighter than their dials could produce. Some claimed they smelled smoke, others swore ash fell from their ceilings. The broadcast ended abruptly. No official acknowledged it. But across the country, listeners began to disappear. The case of Edward Morrow. Journalist Edward Morrow had been tracking the Ashford Hollow incident since the beginning. In May, he received a package with no return address.
A reel-to-reel tape and a note, scrawled in shaking handwriting, "Do not play it out loud." He ignored the warning. On the tape, static surged. Then a single clear voice spoke his name. "Edward, you've been writing about us. That's good. Write faster. We want more to hear." Neighbors later reported loud thumps in his apartment. Then silence. Police found the room empty except for his typewriter. The page inside was smeared with ash and typed with one line, over and over. "Greater than they burn, but they do not die." The last broadcast, June 12, 1956. Radio WQYL's call letters, long abandoned, returned to the air. Across the eastern seaboard, radios switched themselves on. Even unplugged units humming with power, the broadcast lasted exactly 13 minutes. First came a recording of a hymn, warped and distorted, accompanied by the sound of crackling fire. Then came the voices, clearer than ever, greater than. We remember the flames. We remember the tower. We are not gone. We are the air between your words. We are inside the silence. We will not be forgotten. Listeners described overwhelming pressure in their skulls, bleeding from ears and noses, some collapsing in seizures. Emergency rooms filled with patients babbling in broken signals, coughing ash. When the broadcast ended, hundreds more vanished. Their radios sat smoking, their houses filled with the acrid scent of burning wood. Fragments. Not everyone heard it. Some radios remained silent, immune. Those who missed the broadcast described walking outside afterward and seeing faint silhouettes in the smoke above the city. Faces have formed, flickering like a bad transmission. Others insisted they heard their own names whispered in the hum of streetlights. The FCC denied everything. Newspapers stopped reporting. Survivors whispered that you could still tune to it if you knew the right number, that the broadcast still lived somewhere between stations, waiting. And in the ruins of Ashford Hollow, under layers of concrete, people swore they still saw faint light where the tower had stood, pale, pulsing, as if something beneath was trying to break through. By late summer of 1956, the world no longer denied it. The radio fires, as people called them, weren't isolated. From Maine to California, the signal whispered through homes, cars, even military channels. Entire towns vanished without explanation. Still, officials never gave a statement. The air itself felt heavier, like static lingered even in silence. Operation Silence. The government made one final attempt. They called it Operation Silence. Engineers from Bell Labs, the FCC, and the military gathered in a bunker outside Washington, D.C. Their plan: broadcast a countersignal strong enough to erase the frequency forever. On August 19, 1956, the countersignal launched. For 3 full minutes, nothing but a piercing, high-pitched whine filled the nation's radios. Then, abruptly, silence. For a heartbeat, people believed it worked. Then came the screaming, not from radios but from the sky. The ash rain. Witnesses across the country reported the same thing: ash falling, not from factories or fires, but from clear blue skies. In the ash were fragments of letters, scraps of burned paper, old hymn books, wedding invitations, pages charred around the edges. Every scrap dated 1947. Cities were blanketed in it. Children picked up blackened notes that seemed to whisper when read aloud. Old people recognized their own handwriting on papers they hadn't seen in decades. The broadcast had not been silenced. It had been invited. The final signal at 12:01 a.m. on August 20th. Every radio in America activated simultaneously. Even units long broken crackled alive, their dials glowing. The message was short: you tried to bury us, but ash rises. Towers fall. We remain. The sound of flames roared behind the words, so loud that listeners swore they felt heat on their skin. Some radios burst into fire, others melted where they stood, and yet the voices persisted, clear and calm, reciting names, not random names. Living listeners, called one by one. Those who heard their names never answered the phone again. Their homes stood empty by morning. Ashford Hollow revisited. In September, the military returned to Ashford Hollow, the town where it began. The ruins were supposed to be sealed under concrete. Yet when soldiers dug, they found the earth fractured, like something below had swelled and cracked the foundations. At the center, where the tower had once stood, was only a mound of smoking ash. No heat source, no fire, just ash that never cooled, never stopped drifting upward into the air. One soldier swore he heard a radio beneath the rubble, faintly playing a hymn. He was reassigned the next day. The unfinished noted word Morrow's typewriter resurfaced months later in an evidence locker in D.C. Inside was one unfinished line, hammered out in uneven letters. Greater than. The fire is the signal. The signal is the fire. And it stopped mid-word. The carriage jammed. Open frequent side a day. No one admits it ever happened. The archives are sealed. Newspapers from that summer are missing. But if you drive through certain parts of rural America on a humid night, and you turn your dial just right, between stations, you might hear it. A faint hymn, a voice calling names, a sound like fire breathing through static. And if the signal says your name, don't answer, because once the fire finds you, it never lets you go. End of story. Radio static. 1955-56.